Okay, so this is going to be a 6 gored skirt, and this is part 2. I'm going to show you how to do the back, as well as I'm going to show you how to actually do a facing, so you can have a facing for the top of your skirt instead of a waistband. So I've traced out my back sloper. So I've got the dart, just as I did in the front piece. I've got the dart drawn in with my straight line. So once again, I want to divide this into thirds. So this is 1/3. This section will be half of a third. The other half is going to be the other half of the back. It's going to end up being cut on the fold. And then we'll have our side back, which will represent the other third. So I need to find out the width across. I'm going across the hip because that's the widest point. So this is coming out at 9 3/4 roughly. So I'm going to divide that by 3. So actually I'm going to multiply it by 2, then divide by 3. So 9.75 times 2 equals 19.5. Now divide that by 3 and I get 6.5. So this panel here must be 6.5 inches. This panel must be half of that because the other half is going to be on the other side. So it's got to be 3.25. So I'm going to measure over here. Whoops, get the ruler so I can see it. So 6.5 coming out here, and then this is going to be 3.25. I'm off by just a hair, but I was a little bit wider there. So this is now going to be my new parallel line from the hem up to the top. Remember, keep your ruler so that it's nice and square with your hip line and parallel to your center back. So you see how I've got my line here. Now what I need to do is I need to determine my new dart legs. So I'm going to measure over. So I'm actually measuring over 7/8 from here. So here's the bottom of my dart. So I'm just going to put a little line here, 7/7/8. I know my dart is, my back dart is actually 1.5 inches. So I'm going to need to take and draw my legs of my dart 3/4 of an inch off of this center line here. So now you see I'm drawing in my new dart. So even though we're not actually going to use it, I still want to have the legs in there because I am going to use the sides. So this will now be my center panel. It's going to be cut on the fold. This will be my side panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut, let me grab actually I'll grab the blue marker. So this is my side here. This is my new side of my center back. This is going to be so I'm going to split this pattern along this blue line. So I'll have 2 pieces to the back. So I'm going to take a piece of tissue paper here that I can actually see through. Let's bring it down here so we can, because once again, on my front, I added a flare to the pieces. So I want to add a flare to the back pieces. So I'm going to take and trace off the top here. I'm going to end up truing this up in a bit. So I want to add a flare of 1 inch to each side. So what I'm going to do is this, I want to mark, there's the bottom of that dart. I'm also going to mark in the hip line here, because at some point when I get seam allowances and everything, I want to notch it at the hip line. So my new back piece is going to start up here, but when I get to that dart, I want to extend it by 1 inch at the bottom, just like I did on the front. So I've drawn 1 inch line here, make sure everything hasn't shifted. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to draw up, joining up to the bottom of that dart leg. So I've kept this line fairly straight, which you want to do. You don't want to have too much of a curve, especially on your center panels of your gores. Otherwise, what's going to happen is it's not going to lay flat on the body. So now I want to do the same here on the side seam. So I'm going to measure over 1 inch. So I'm measuring over 1 inch. And what I'm going to do, just so I kind of have the same line, is I'm going to draw in my side seam down to that mark, and then I'm going to just join this up the bottom so that it blends up in here at the top. You may need to use a little bit of a curved ruler depending upon your sloper. If you're using your own personal sloper, you may have a little bit more of a curve at the side seam. Remember, you want to keep your side seams the same. So whatever curve you have on the front side seam, you want to make sure you have on the back. So now this here, remember, I do want to bring up the side 1/4 of an inch. And so I'm going to blend it back down. Now you can true things up. You may find that you want to bring this inside seam up a little bit too, because this is on an angle. So this is going to be a little bit biased. Depending on your fabric, it may have that same little bit of a dip right here. So you can kind of take a look at that. I do want to draw my grain line. So remember, my straight lines here that went from the base of my darts are a grain line. So I'm going to take and I'm going to draw a grain line here. So this is now, this is the side back panel. And I'm going to cut 2. And it is the size 10. So it's the sloper, okay? So here I would notch, and I might put a notch here. Just depends on your fabric. You don't really have to. If you're notching here, you don't necessarily have to notch at the hips, but you will want to notch both side and at the center. Okay, so now I'm just going to do the same and trace off my back panel, just making sure I've got enough space here. So I'm going to draw my center back line, so that's on the straight grain, because this piece is going to be cut on the fold. Remember, this particular skirt is going to have a side zipper. So I'm going to trace out down to the bottom of that dart. I'm going to mark it just like I have there. I'm also going to mark hip line. Don't need to do it on this side because that is the side front or side back. So now I'm going to mark out here 1 inch, and I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to join from my hem up to this line here. Just kind of like to make sure that it's not going to have a bump in it. And then the same thing here. We're going to bring this up by 1/4 of an inch at the side. Actually, no, we're not. That's the center front. So we are just putting this on the straight here. We don't bring it up. Otherwise, your skirt would have a V in the front there. Okay, so now you can see this is my center back. So cut on fold. Okay, so I've got a center front and a center back. So I'm now going to show you how to do the facing. So I'm just going to move that piece And I'm actually going to move the back piece out of the way. And I'm going to bring in my two front pieces, just because I've already got them sort of semi-prepped. So this is my center front piece that was being cut on the fold, and this is my side. So I'm just going to line these up, matching up here, making sure that they line up and match at the top. So I could tape these together, which I could do, or I can just put a pin in here, make sure that they're pinned and that they're lining up on the stitching line. So I'm just gonna pin here. So now what I've done is I've created a smooth top here. So now I can make my facing. So for this facing, I want it to be about, let's say we want it to be 2 inches deep. Okay, so I'm just gonna take and draw from starting at the side, measure down 2 inches, and measure right down from the top of your waist. Come across here, your center front, right here, right on the seam line. So this line here now, I can join this all up. I can make it one nice smooth line. Now, because I've made this 2 inches deep, I'm not going to put any extra seam allowance on this. This is actually going to be the finished edge of my facing. It's going to be cut on the fold. I'm going to have one piece. So I'll take, let's take this piece of tracing paper here. It's always good to have lots of tracing paper. You can see through your pattern quite easily. Normally you would not be using such a thick marker. You'd use something a little bit thinner. Because remember, we're going to be cutting on, if I'm tracing on the, so that this is the outside of my line, I'm going to be cutting on the outside. So I'm just going to trace this out here. This is going to be cut on the fold. Now I could fold this piece of tissue and or tracing paper and actually cut one full band for the front, cut one band on the straight grain, but I want to cut it on the fold. So this is the waist facing, and you can do this, you can probably write better than I can upside down. You can do this on any skirt that you want. If you don't want to have, there, cut waist facing, that's backwards. Anyway, so there's my facing for the front, and make sure you write on here, front. So then I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm going to take my back pieces, which now I've got on the other side here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut my back piece here and my back piece here, center back. Might be able to just fold them and line them up. Make sure that you match that notch. I'm going to get that to fold. So I've got these lined up, sort of. So then I'm going to take this together just like I did in the front, draw down 2 inches again from the top of the waist, trace it all out. It's again going to be cut on the center back. So I'm going to, and label center back. So you're going to have a front and a back facing. Okay, so that is the 6 gored skirt, front and back, with a facing.